The Derby had always been more than a race. It was a ritual of power, prestige, and whispered rivalries, where silk hats and velvet gowns paraded under the banners of tradition. On this particular summer afternoon, the sky stretched wide and mercilessly blue, the air filled with the scent of horse sweat, champagne, and freshly cut grass. The stands roared like a storm of voices, each cry blending into the thunder of hooves pounding against the earth. Lord Ashbourne's stallion, Midnight Glory, was the crowd's darling, a sleek black thoroughbred whose muscles glistened like polished marble under the sun. And astride him rode Richard Cavendish, the champion jockey whose name was whispered with both admiration and envy. Cavendish was young, handsome, and reckless, with the charm of a prince and the arrogance of a man who knew the world bent to his will. Aristocrats leaned forward in their private boxes, monocles glinting, gloved hands clutching betting slips. They whispered about fortunes to be won or lost, about debts and rivalries disguised as polite conversation. Beneath the laughter and champagne toasts lay something darker: greed, resentment, and secrets too dangerous to be spoken aloud. As the horses lined up at the starting gate, a hush fell across the arena. The crowd collectively held its breath. Then the crack of the starter's gun shattered the silence, and the race exploded into life. Hooves hammered, whips cracked. Cavendish pushed. Midnight Glory forward with the ruthless confidence of a man born to win. For a moment it seemed inevitable. The black stallion surged ahead, leaving rivals choking on dust. The stands erupted in wild cheers. But fate is never so predictable. In the final stretch, when victory seemed certain, something strange happened. Midnight Glory faltered, as though struck by an unseen force. Cavendish lurched sideways, his body jerking unnaturally. Gasps cut through the air like blades. The stallion stumbled, and Cavendish was thrown violently onto the track. He did not rise again. The silence that followed was unbearable. The roaring crowd, moments ago a hurricane of sound, now seemed suffocated by shock. People stood frozen in their seats, hands clutching mouths, eyes wide with disbelief. A man like Richard Cavendish wasn't supposed to fall. Champions were meant to endure, to stand immortal. And yet there he lay, motionless against the dirt, his silks stained with the dust of the track. Medics rushed forward, their white coats a blur against the brown earth. Midnight Glory whinnied frantically, eyes rolling with panic as stable hands struggled to calm him. But it was too late. Richard Cavendish's body lay still, his head twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood trickled across his cheek like a signature from death himself. Whispers began to stir. "A tragic accident," someone murmured. "The horse stumbled, that's all." But others were less certain. The fall had looked wrong. Too sudden, too deliberate. Eyes darted across the stands, searching for explanations where none should exist. Among those watching with cold precision was Edmund Harrow, a detective who had not come to the Derby for sport, but for observation. He had never trusted the glittering world of aristocrats and gamblers, where fortunes rose and fell on the flip of a coin. And as he stared at Cavendish's lifeless body, a single thought lodged in his mind. Accidents had reasons, and reasons had names. Lord Ashbourne pushed through the crowd, his face pale, but his posture rigid with aristocratic dignity. "Tragic," he declared to those nearby, though his eyes betrayed something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Behind him, Lady Cavendish, young and newly widowed, screamed her husband's name, her voice slicing through the silence like broken glass. The race had ended, but for Harrow, the game had only just begun. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring like a hive of disturbed bees. Some spoke of Cavendish with reverence, others with bitterness, but everywhere whispers spread. Was it really an accident? Detective Harrow lingered, his keen eyes scanning the aristocratic faces in the private boxes. He caught fragments of conversation. Terrible, but perhaps inevitable. He owed so much money, and the rivals he made, God, the rivals. Harrow descended into the stables, where the scent of hay and sweat hung heavy. Midnight Glory snorted, stamping restlessly. The horse bore no visible injuries, yet his saddle strap looked frayed, suspiciously so. Harrow knelt, fingers brushing over the leather. It was worn in a way that spoke not of chance, but of intent. Someone had tampered with it. He rose slowly, his mind already assembling a web of motives and suspects. Cavendish had been adored by the public, but adored men collect enemies as easily as lovers. And within this world of aristocrats and gamblers, everyone had something to gain from his death. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky remained clear. It was not the weather that threatened storm, but the gathering of secrets. Harrow lit a cigarette, his face lost in shadows. Somewhere in the stands, he thought, the murderer was watching him. The Derby grounds had emptied by nightfall, but silence never truly reigned where horses slept. The stables breathed with the sound of restless hooves, the rustle of straw, the occasional anxious whinny. Moonlight spilled through the slats in pale strips, cutting the darkness into bars like the inside of a prison. For some, it was. Secrets were locked here as tightly as any animal. Detective Edmund Harrow moved quietly among the stalls, his boots crunching against scattered straw. Midnight Glory lifted his head at Harrow's approach, ears flicking nervously. The stallion's dark eyes reflected the lantern light with a glimmer that was almost human. Fear, confusion, perhaps even betrayal. Horses, Harrow thought, never lied. They remembered every hand that touched them, every cruelty or kindness. Harrow crouched beside the tack rack, running his fingers across the saddles and bridles. His hand lingered on Cavendish's saddle. The leather strap was unmistakably tampered with, slashed just enough to hold under normal strain, but snap when pushed to its limit. That limit had been reached in the final stretch. The cut was precise, deliberate. Not an accident. Not neglect. Sabotage. A sudden noise. Hay shifting. A creak of wood. Harrow's head snapped around, hand instinctively brushing the revolver hidden beneath his coat. In the shadows stood a boy no older than 16, clutching a broom like a weapon. His face was pale, eyes wide as coins. "You shouldn't be here," Harrow said evenly. "Neither should you," the boy shot back, though his voice trembled. He wore the simple clothes of a stable hand, hands rough with work. But his fear was not of Harrow. It was of something else, something unseen. Harrow recognized the look. The boy knew more than he dared say. "I'm not here to harm the horses." "These," Harrow said. He lowered his tone, coaxing. "I'm here to find the truth about Richard Cavendish. You saw something, didn't you?" The boy shifted nervously, glancing toward the door. I clean the stalls. I don't get involved." "That strap didn't cut itself," Harrow pressed. "If you know something and keep silent, the next death may be yours, or worse, pinned upon you." The boy flinched as though struck. He dropped his eyes, muttering, "Not here, not now. They're watching." "Who, Rachel?" Harrow demanded, but the boy bolted before an answer could come, vanishing into the shadows like smoke. Harrow straightened slowly, his heart heavy. The silence returned, pressing in on him. He placed a steadying hand on Midnight Glory's neck, feeling the great beast's pulse beneath his skin. "Someone wanted him dead," Harrow whispered, more to himself than to the horse. "And you were made the instrument of it." The stallion snorted, a ghostly plume of breath in the cold night air, as though in grim agreement. The Cavendish estate lay only a few miles from the Derby grounds, an austere mansion of cold stone softened by ivy and moonlight. It was here that Edmund Harrow found himself the following evening, summoned under the guise of condolence but driven by his need for answers. Lady Eleanor Cavendish received him in a drawing-room draped in velvet curtains, her morning gown as black as spilled ink. She was young, no more than 23, her beauty sharpened by grief into something almost dangerous. Her eyes were rimmed red, yet within them flickered a light Harrow had seen before, calculation hidden beneath sorrow. "I suppose you've come to offer sympathy, detective," she said, voice low, brittle. "That seems to be the fashion today." "I've come," Harrow replied carefully, "because I believe your husband's death was no accident." Her teacup rattled against its saucer. She turned away toward the fireplace, where flames licked hungrily at logs. "Accidents happen, detective. Horses stumble, riders fall. It is the risk they take every time." "Perhaps," Harrow said, "but straps do not cut themselves, and Richard Cavendish had enemies enough to fill this room." At that, her composure cracked. She clenched the edge of the mantel, knuckles white. "Do you think I don't know? Richard owed money to half of London. He drank, he gambled, he courted scandal like others court love. And yet," her voice faltered, her breath shuddering, "and yet I loved him. Fool that I am." Harrow studied her. The grief was real, but so was the bitterness. Love and hate often slept in the same bed. He stepped closer. "Who benefits from his death, Lady Cavendish?" Her eyes flashed. "Perhaps I do, detective. The debts, the shame, gone with him. The estate falls to me now. Do you mean to accuse me?" "I mean to ask questions," Harrow said calmly. "And if you are innocent, you should welcome them." She laughed then, a hollow, brittle sound. "Innocent! In this world no one is innocent, least of all those who smile at you while sharpening their knives." The firelight cast her face in cruel shadows, her veil of grief both concealing and revealing. Harrow left the estate unsettled, the echo of her words gnawing at him. No one is innocent. Perhaps she was right. The following day, the air buzzed not with mourning, but with gossip. The aristocracy, that polished circle of wealth and tradition, gathered in Lord Ashbourne's grand hall under the guise of respect. Black attire, solemn words, but the glimmer in their eyes betrayed excitement. Death was, after all, just another piece upon their chessboard. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light as laughter echoed beneath the strains of a string quartet. Harrow walked among them, invisible yet observant. He noted the way men leaned too close when whispering, the way women's gloved hands clutched pearls while their eyes lingered elsewhere. To the casual observer, it was a gathering of grief. To Harrow, it was a masquerade of lies. "Terrible business, Cavendish," muttered Lord Pembroke, swirling brandy in his glass. But hardly surprising, he was reckless, always was. Sooner or later, fate collects its debts. "Fate or a sharper hand?" Harrow interjected, his voice calm but cutting. Pembroke stiffened, offering only a thin smile before drifting away. Lady Ashbourne, regal in mourning lace, approached Harrow with the smile of a woman accustomed to manipulating men. "Detective, I do hope you're not disturbing our guests with dreadful talk of suspicion. The Derby is a place of tradition. Scandal. It ruins us." "Scandal is born from truth, Lady Ashbourne," Harrow replied, "and truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface." Her smile faltered only slightly, but it was enough. She excused herself, her skirts whispering against marble as she retreated into the crowd. Everywhere Harrow looked, motives glittered like jewels. Rivalries, debts, affairs. Cavendish's death was less a tragedy than an opportunity. He thought again of Lady Cavendish's words. No one is innocent. Perhaps the widow's veil concealed more than sorrow. Perhaps it revealed the rot at the heart of this gilded society. As the night deepened, Harrow stood alone near the balcony, staring at the city lights beyond. He felt the walls closing in, the laughter of the aristocrats like the cawing of crows. Somewhere among them, a murderer smiled, toasting their own cleverness. But the game was not yet theirs. Harrow's resolve hardened. This world of velvet masks and jeweled daggers would not keep its secrets forever. Detective Edmund Harrow returned to his lodgings late that night with the widow's words echoing in his mind. "No one is innocent." He lit a lamp, casting a soft glow over his scattered notes. Names and connections sprawled across the pages. Aristocrats, jockeys, bookmakers, grooms. Yet one word appeared again and again, underlined in harsh ink. Debt. Richard Cavendish had lived beyond his means. He gambled heavily at private clubs where fortunes shifted with the turn of a card. He borrowed from men whose smiles hid sharpened teeth. Harrow had spoken to a bookmaker that afternoon, a small man with twitching hands, who swore Cavendish owed more than he could ever repay. But the bookmaker was not alone. Debts stretched like tangled vines into every corner of society. Harrow leaned back, closing his eyes. Murder rarely sprang from one cause. It was a culmination, a knot of motives pulled tight until it strangled. But debt was a powerful hand around any man's throat. It destroyed friendships, marriages, and reputations. And sometimes it ended lives. The following morning, Harrow strode into the heart of London's West End, where gentlemen's clubs loomed like fortresses of secrecy. Inside one, the heavy scent of tobacco clung to velvet drapes, and the clatter of dice punctuated low murmurs. It was here that Cavendish had spent his final nights before the Derby. Detective Harrow. The greeting came from Lord Winthrop, a stout man with a ruby nose and a belly pressed against his waistcoat. "You seek answers about poor Cavendish, no doubt. Such a shame, such a loss." "Shame indeed," Harrow said evenly, "and I imagine his unpaid debts are a loss to you as well." Winthrop's jovial smile faltered. "Now see here, detective, it is not seemly to discuss finances of the departed." "Not seemly, perhaps, but necessary," Harrow replied, "because if those debts gave you motive, then Richard Cavendish's death was no accident." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clink of a glass somewhere behind them. Winthrop blustered, but his eyes betrayed fear. Harrow pressed no further. He had learned enough. The shadow of debt stretched long, and those who lived within it would do anything to escape. As he stepped out into the gray London air, Harrow's resolve hardened. Somewhere within these debts lay the blade that cut Richard Cavendish's saddle. He only had to find whose hand guided it. The Derby was not only a stage for wealth and wagers, it was a battlefield for pride. Every jockey lived in the shadow of competition, their bodies honed by discipline, their egos sharpened by rivalry. Among them, none had loathed Richard Cavendish more than Henry Blackwell. Harrow found Blackwell in a modest training yard beyond the city, exercising his mare under the watchful eye of a trainer. Blackwell was younger than Cavendish had been, lean and wiry, with eyes like flint. He dismounted when Harrow approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're wasting your time, detective," Blackwell said before Harrow even spoke. "If Cavendish fell, it was his own fault. He rode recklessly, always did." "Reckless enough to have his saddle strap cut?" Harrow asked quietly. Blackwell's jaw tightened. "If you're suggesting I had a hand in that—" "I'm suggesting you had reason," Harrow interrupted. "Everyone knows Cavendish mocked you, stole races from you, even spread rumors about your family. Hatred can ride a man harder than any horse." Blackwell's hands curled into fists, but his eyes flashed with something beyond anger, pain. "He ruined me, Detective. Every chance I had, he took. Sponsors turned away. Owners doubted me. All because of his lies. Did I wish him gone? Yes. Did I kill him? No." "Convenient denial," Harrow said, studying him. "But you were there, close enough to see the saddle fail, close enough to ensure it happened." For a long moment silence stretched between them, broken only by the horse's impatient snort. Then Blackwell's expression shifted, hardening into weary resignation. "You'll never understand, Detective. In our world, the race isn't just on the track. It's everywhere. Every conversation, every deal, every smile that hides a dagger. Cavendish knew that better than anyone. Maybe that's why he lost." Harrow left the yard unconvinced, his thoughts circling like vultures. Blackwell's hatred was clear, his motive undeniable, but motive alone did not prove guilt. Still, the rival jockey remained a piece upon the board, one Harrow could not ignore. The memory of the frightened boy in the stables gnawed at Harrow. A child who had seen too much, whose silence screamed louder than words. Harrow returned to the Derby grounds, the air sharp with the scent of rain-soaked earth. He found the boy sweeping near the paddock, shoulders hunched, eyes darting as though shadows held teeth. "Still keeping silent?" Harrow asked, his voice low but firm. The boy flinched, gripping the broom tighter. "I told you, they're watching." "Who, bro?" Harrow pressed. "The aristocrats, the jockeys, or someone else?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "I saw a man near the tack room, the night before the race. He wasn't supposed to be there." "Describe him." "I can't. It was dark. But his boots, polished, not a stable hand's, a gentleman's boots." Harrow's pulse quickened. "Did he touch the saddle?" The boy nodded faintly, fear etched across his young face. "I heard the leather tear. I wanted to shout, but if they knew I'd seen—" His voice cracked. "They'd kill me." Harrow crouched, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did the right thing, telling me. I'll protect you." But even as he spoke the words, Harrow felt the weight of uncertainty. Could he truly shield the boy from the power and wealth of those who might be involved? Secrets guarded by the aristocracy were rarely uncovered without blood. As Harrow walked away, his mind churned. A gentleman in polished boots, a saddle slashed in the dark, and a boy who feared for his life. The noose was tightening around the unseen murderer, but with every step closer, Harrow knew the danger grew not just for himself, but for anyone who dared speak the truth. The coroner's report arrived with the morning fog. Harrow unfolded the parchment, his eyes narrowing as he read the clinical words. Traces of laudanum and morphine had been found in Richard Cavendish's bloodstream, enough to weaken him, to dull his reflexes. Not a fatal dose, but sufficient to compromise him on the saddle. The fall had finished what the poison began. Murder, then, not speculation. Fact. Harrow paced the length of his study, mind racing. Who had access to Cavendish in those final hours? His wine glass, his supper, even his post-race tonic. Any could have carried the drug. The aristocrats spoke of honor and tradition, yet their halls reeked of secrets. Now one of them had crossed into blood. Later that afternoon, Harrow returned to the Cavendish estate. The widow received him in a parlor draped in mourning black, her face veiled, though her eyes glittered like steel. On the table lay untouched wine, a cruel reminder of indulgences past. "Poison?" she whispered when Harrow revealed the findings. So it was not fate. Someone wished him gone. "Who served his drink on Derby night?" Harrow asked. Her hand trembled as she poured tea. "A footman, as always, but anyone could have touched the glass before it reached him. Richard was careless, too trusting." "Or too hated," Harrow replied. "Tell me, madam, who despised him most?" Her silence was answer enough. The names were many: rivals, debtors, even friends. Cavendish's life had been a chalice passed from hand to hand, and someone had filled it with poison. Harrow left the house with a growing certainty. The Derby had been more than sport. It had been a stage, and Richard Cavendish's death the final act of a carefully written tragedy. That evening, the grand ball at Ashbourne Hall glittered with wealth and deceit. Chandeliers blazed, gowns shimmered, and masked faces drifted through the gilded rooms like specters. Harrow moved among them, a shadow in plain sight, ears straining for whispers, eyes scanning for slips of truth. Laughter rang hollow beneath the music. Conversations broke off when he drew near. Every aristocrat present wore not just a satin mask, but another, deeper one, the mask of civility hiding greed, jealousy, and fear. If Cavendish's ghost walked among them, it would have found plenty of candidates for vengeance. Near the balcony, Harrow overheard Lord Winthrop muttering to a baroness, his words laced with bitterness. "He owed me thousands, and now I'll never see a farthing. Good riddance." The baroness hissed at him to hush, but her eyes betrayed curiosity. She, too, had known something. Elsewhere, Henry Blackwell stood brooding near the orchestra, wine in hand. His gaze followed the widow Cavendish, who drifted like a swan through the crowd, her beauty drawing attention, her grief veiled in charm. Harrow noted the tension in Blackwell's jaw, the longing or resentment, or both, that glimmered there. Then, as the music swelled, a hush rippled through the hall. A figure in a dark mask approached the widow and bowed low. Their exchange was brief, almost inaudible, but Harrow caught one phrase. He got what he deserved. The widow stiffened, eyes flashing with both fury and fear. When she turned, the masked figure had melted into the throng. Harrow's pulse quickened. Lies swirled here, thicker than perfume. Somewhere within this masquerade, the killer moved freely, certain of their untouchable status. But Harrow had learned long ago, every mask, no matter how ornate, eventually slips. It was near midnight when Harrow finally cornered his quarry, not the killer, but a witness. A servant girl, trembling in the corridor behind the ballroom, clutching a tray to her chest. She avoided his gaze, yet her lips quivered as though words long bottled threatened to spill. "I know what you're here for," she whispered. "It's about Sir Richard." "Tell me," Harrow urged softly. "You have nothing to fear." But she shook her head violently. "If they knew I spoke, I'd lose everything, my position, my family's place. They'd ruin us." "Or worse," Harrow murmured. "I can protect you, but only if I know the truth." Her eyes darted, searching the shadows. At last she leaned closer. "On the night before the race, I saw Lady Cavendish speaking with Lord Ashbourne. They were close. Too close. She swore him to secrecy, but I heard enough. She said Richard's debts endangered them all, that if something wasn't done, everything would collapse." Harrow's breath caught. The widow conspiring with Ashbourne? Was it love or fear or ambition that bound them? The servant shivered as though confessing sealed her fate. "That's all I know. Please, don't tell them I spoke." Harrow nodded gravely, tucking the revelation into his growing web of intrigue. A widow with motives beyond grief. A nobleman with power to protect or destroy. The shadows whispered of conspiracies deeper than he had guessed. As he stepped back into the night, Harrow felt the ground shifting beneath him. Cavendish's death was no longer a simple question of rivalry or revenge. It was a storm gathering at the highest levels of society, and storms left no one untouched. The smoke-filled back room of the Ashbourne Club was thick with secrets. Here, among leather chairs and oak-paneled walls, the true Derby wagers had been placed, not the trifling sums of common spectators, but fortunes that could ruin or crown dynasties. Harrow pushed through the haze, eyes fixed on a ledger left on a gaming table. The names scrawled across the pages were not the desperate scribbles of gamblers, but the signatures of lords, dukes, and barons. Cavendish's name appeared often, too often. Bets placed not only on his victories, but also, shockingly, on his fall. Someone had wagered a staggering sum against him, an amount so precise it seemed less a gamble than a guarantee. Harrow traced the line with his finger. Lord Ashbourne, 50,000 guineas. Cavendish to lose. His jaw tightened. To lose? And he had. The ink was damning, the handwriting unmistakable. As he tucked the ledger into his coat, a shadow emerged from the smoke. Henry Blackwell. His voice was low, heavy with meaning. "Careful, detective. Men have vanished for less than what you now hold." "And yet you remain," Harrow replied evenly. "Why?" Blackwell's smile was grim. "Because I want the truth as much as you do. But tread lightly. The game you've entered was never meant for men like us." Before Harrow could answer, Blackwell melted back into the haze, leaving only the sting of tobacco and the weight of conspiracy in his wake. The ledger burned in Harrow's pocket. Proof of intent and planning. But only useful if he lived to use it. He lived. The following morning, Harrow returned to the Cavendish estate, the widow awaiting him in her mourning gown, her veil drawn tighter than before. She poured no tea this time. Instead, she poured out words, her composure cracking at last. "You think me heartless," she said bitterly, "but you did not live with him. Richard was charming to the world, but cruel to those closest. He drank, he gambled, he humiliated me in public. I begged him to stop, but he laughed. To him I was a possession, not a wife." Her eyes glistened, though her voice hardened. "So yes, I spoke with Ashbourne. He offered protection. He offered escape. But I never wished Richard dead, only free from him." Harrow studied her carefully. Was this grief, speaking, or strategy? "And yet," he said, "Richard is dead, poisoned, sabotaged, and your name entwines with Ashbourne's in whispers." Her hands trembled, clutching the armrest like claws. "If you mean to accuse me, do so. But I swear, detective, I would never have risked scandal, never have risked my soul, for such an end. Whoever killed him, they did so not for me, but for themselves." Harrow's eyes softened, though suspicion lingered. The widow's words rang with both truth and evasion. She was no innocent, but perhaps not the hand that had dealt death. Still, her confession added layers to the web. Betrayal, desperation, the scent of freedom disguised as mourning. As Harrow left, he wondered, was she a victim of circumstance, or an actress rehearsing grief for her own salvation? The Baron of Winthrop had always been a man of impeccable posture and rigid dignity. Yet when Harrow arrived unannounced at his country estate, he found the Baron pale and unsteady, his study reeking of brandy. Piles of letters cluttered his desk, unpaid debts, demands, threats. "You've come to accuse me," Winthrop spat, though his voice cracked with fatigue. "But I'll tell you this, detective. Cavendish's death saved me as much as it damned me. He owed me money, yes, but I owed others far more. His fall bought me time." "Or perhaps it erased your debt altogether," Harrow countered. He withdrew the club ledger and slid it across the desk. "You bet against him, 50,000 guineas, enough to cover your losses and more." Winthrop's hand trembled as he reached for the glass of brandy. "You don't understand. They forced me. Those men in the club, they don't forgive. They wanted Richard gone. And I—" his voice faltered. "I was their pawn. My name in that ledger binds me, but I never touched the poison, never frayed the saddle. I swear it." Harrow leaned closer. "Then who did?" The Baron's eyes darted to the fire, as though the flames might swallow his guilt. "Ask Ashbourne, ask the widow, ask Blackwell. But leave me be, detective. If they learn I spoke to you, I am as good as buried." The words chilled Harrow more than the night air outside. Pawns, players, debts, betrayals, the game was deeper than he imagined. Cavendish had not merely fallen from his horse. He had been pushed, sacrificed on an altar built by greed and fear. And Harrow knew the altar's architects still walked free, hidden behind their titles and silks. It was near dawn when Harrow received the package. Delivered in silence by a stable boy, its wax seal bore the Cavendish crest. Harrow broke it open with caution, unrolling the parchment inside. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard Cavendish's, bold and arrogant, even in ink. "If this reaches you, I am already dead. Trust no one." The letter unfolded into a confession of sorts, or perhaps a warning. Cavendish detailed his debts, his affairs, his enemies. He knew someone wanted him gone, and he had even listed names. Ashbourne, Blackwell, Winthrop. Each, he claimed, had reason to wish his ruin. And yet, the final line chilled Harrow most. "If it is my wife who betrays me, let God judge her. I never could." Harrow read the letter twice, thrice, the words settling like lead in his chest. This was not the testament of a coward, but of a man who understood the wolves circling him. Cavendish had expected death, had almost invited it. But why had he sent the letter to Harrow, a detective he barely knew? As dawn light spilled into his study, Harrow understood. Cavendish had trusted no one in his world of wealth and deceit. He had needed an outsider, someone unshackled by aristocratic ties, someone who could see clearly. Now Cavendish's voice reached from the grave, demanding justice. But justice in these halls was as fragile as glass and as easily shattered. Lord Ashbourne greeted Harrow in his hunting lodge, the air thick with cigar smoke, and the mounted heads of beasts staring from the walls. He poured brandy with a casualness that seemed rehearsed, his smile practiced, his tone perfectly measured. "You've been asking questions," Ashbourne said, swirling the amber liquid. "Dangerous questions." "That's my profession," Harrow replied. He laid the ledger on the table, watching Ashbourne's eyes flicker at the sight. 50,000 guineas on Cavendish's loss. Care to explain? Ashbourne's laugh was low, almost mocking. "A wager, nothing more. Men of my standing often gamble. It proves nothing." "It proves motive," Harrow said. "And motive becomes evidence when paired with opportunity." Ashbourne leaned forward, his eyes cold now, the mask slipping. "Be careful, detective. Men like Cavendish dig their own graves. I merely ensured mine remained unoccupied." The words hung heavy between them. Ashbourne did not confess, but neither did he deny. It was as though the murder itself were irrelevant to him, an inconvenience, perhaps even a convenience. As Harrow rose to leave, Ashbourne called after him. "A word of advice. Tread carefully. You think you're hunting the truth, but in this game, truth is the prey, and hunters often end as carcasses." The fire crackled in the hearth, but Harrow felt only cold. Ashbourne had revealed nothing concrete, yet everything about him screamed of guilt, or power enough to twist guilt into triumph. Either way, Harrow knew this was no longer an investigation. It was a duel. Rain lashed against the city as Harrow walked through the narrow streets, thoughts heavy as the thunder overhead. Everywhere he turned, secrets unraveled into darker secrets. A poisoned chalice, a sabotaged saddle, debts and affairs, all threads of a tapestry woven not by one hand, but many. At the club, whispers grew louder. Aristocrats who once dismissed Cavendish's death as an accident now eyed one another with suspicion. The poison had not only killed a man, it had infected trust itself. Alliances faltered, rivals sharpened their daggers behind velvet curtains. And amid the storm, Harrow sensed a shadow moving against him. His inquiries were no longer unnoticed. Servants avoided his gaze. Letters vanished before reaching him. Even the widow, once eager to confide, now grew distant, as though warned. Someone was tightening the noose, not around the guilty, but around him. That night, in his chamber, Harrow found a single playing card slipped beneath the door. The Ace of Spades, Death's calling card. He stared at it for a long while, the storm raging outside like an omen. Whoever had orchestrated Cavendish's demise was not merely protecting secrets, they were silencing threats. Harrow was now counted among them. The storm had gathered, and Harrow knew it would break soon. When it did, the halls of privilege would not echo with music and laughter, but with confessions and blood. The day of the memorial derby arrived, a cruel spectacle draped in mourning veils. Aristocrats gathered once more in their silks and finery, pretending grief while whispering wagers. The track, still wet from the storm, gleamed like dark glass under the gray sky. Detective Harrow moved among them, carrying Cavendish's final letter, the damning ledger, and the knowledge that all paths led here. The air was tense, every smile too sharp, every handshake too firm. The Derby had become less a race than a stage for reckoning. As the horses lined up, Harrow's eyes swept across the crowd. The widow stood alone, her veil trembling in the wind. The Baron of Winthrop nursed a flask, his shoulders hunched under invisible chains. Henry Blackwell lingered near the edge of the grandstand, unreadable as ever. And at the center, Lord Ashbourne, commanding, untouchable, as though death itself bowed before him. The gates flew open, hooves thundered, and the crowd roared. Yet Harrow barely watched the race. His focus was fixed on Ashbourne, who leaned close to a companion, whispering words drowned by the chaos. Ashbourne's hand lifted, signaling, a gesture too precise, too deliberate. Moments later, a rider fell. Gasps rippled through the stands. The same trick, a frayed strap, a failing saddle, an echo of Cavendish's death. Only this time the victim lived, clutching the reins, dragging himself free. It was a rehearsal exposed, a shadow of the crime repeated in daylight. The crowd erupted into panic. Whispers turned to accusations. And Harrow knew the reckoning had begun. Harrow confronted Lord Ashbourne in the smoking room of the club, the air thick with tension and brandy fumes. The ledger and Cavendish's letter lay upon the table between them, silent weapons. "You orchestrated it," Harrow said, his voice low but unyielding. "The debts, the wagers, the poisoned chalice. Cavendish's death was no accident. It was your design." Ashbourne's eyes glittered with disdain. "And if it were, what proof have you, detective? A drunken baron's confession, a widow's bitterness, a gambler's ghost of a letter?" He leaned back, smiling. "The world believes what I tell it. That is power." "But power crumbles under truth," Harrow replied. He struck the table, the ledger flying open, revealing Ashbourne's damning signature. "This proves your hand in the wager against Cavendish, and this," he lifted the letter, his voice ringing like steel, "is Cavendish's own testimony, anticipating his murder. Your empire was built on corruption, and now it will collapse." Ashbourne's mask slipped. His smile faded into something darker, colder. "You think you've won? Even if I fall, detective, men like me never die. We are replaced. The game endures." Before Harrow could answer, the door burst open. Blackwell stood there, armed with pistol and resolve. "No, Ashbourne," he said. "This game ends with you." For the first time, Ashbourne looked afraid. Ashbourne was dragged from the club in shackles, rain pouring down like judgment from the heavens. The aristocrats who once bowed before him now turned away, whispering as though his disgrace were contagious. His empire of wagers and whispers crumbled in a single night. Harrow stood in the downpour, watching. The widow approached, her veil lifted, her face pale but resolute. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It is never over," Harrow replied. "But justice, in its own imperfect way, has been served." She lowered her gaze, perhaps in relief, perhaps in guilt. Harrow would never know the full measure of her heart. Some truths remained locked away, secrets that no detective could unravel. But Cavendish's death had not been in vain. His voice had reached from the grave, and it had toppled a king. As the storm subsided, Harrow lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the damp night air. The Derby would continue as it always had. Men would wager, horses would run, and somewhere in the shadows, ambition would stir again. But for now, at least, one storm had passed. And Harrow, weary but unbroken, walked into the rain, ready for the next case that fate would place in his path.